In this video, we're going to create a MySQL database using our cPanel dashboard. So to access the cPanel, just go to the complete web hosting website and then log in. And after that, click on Services. Then click on the account that you created at the beginning of the course. Okay, now to access the cPanel, just click on Login to cPanel. So here is our cPanel dashboard. So if you scroll down, you will see a Databases section. So to create a database, just click on MySQL Databases. So first, let's choose a name for our database. So I'm going to call it Users. Okay, so the full name is going to be the text you see in this box _ users. So let's click on Create Database and go back. Okay, so now we've got one database created. Okay, now we need to create a user and password for our database so that we can connect to the database using PHP later on. Okay, so let's choose a username. I'm going to go for user. Okay, so that's the full username. And then for the password, we can generate the password using the password generator. So if you're happy with the password, just copy it somewhere safe and then click on I have copied the password and then use password. Okay, and now let's create the user. Okay, let's go back. And just make sure that you store all the details somewhere safe. So that's the password and that's the username, which starts with this and then user. Okay. Now we've got our database created, we've got a username and password. Now we're gonna access the database using PHP MyAdmin. Okay, so we're going to go back to the cPanel and then we're going to go to PHP MyAdmin. Now on the left hand side you can see our database. So if you click on it, you'll be able to create a table inside the database. Okay. So we're going to create a table and then we're going to use it to store details about website users. We can store their email address, their password, and also their age. And let's add an ID, which is going to identify every single user. So at the end, we're going to have 4 columns. Okay, so let's call our table users. It's going to have 4 columns. So let's click on Go. Now we're going to be able to set details about different fields inside our table. So each of these rows corresponds to one column. Okay, so let's start with the first column. So I'm going to call it ID. So this field is going to identify every single user in our table. Okay, so for the type, we're going to go for an integer. All right, and also we're going to give this field an index primary. So this is referring to a primary key, which is going to correspond to one single record in our table. Okay, so that's what a primary key means. So every record is going to have a unique ID. And finally, we're going to have another setting for the ID. It's going to be the auto increment. So auto increment means that if we create a new record and we don't specify the ID for that record, then automatically the ID is going to be the previous ID or the last ID plus 1. Okay, so that's what auto increment means. Okay, let's move to the next one. So the next one is going to be the email column. Okay, so for the type, we're going to be looking at the string types. So let's start with varchar. Okay. And let's go for a maximum length of 30. So 30 means that the maximum number of characters we're going to store in the field is going to be 30. So even if the user inputs an input of 40 characters in our form in HTML, in the database, if we want to store their input, we're going to be able to store only 30 characters. Okay, so it's really important to control the input lengths in the HTML forms. Okay, now for the string types, let's have a look at the difference between the char and varchar types. So if we go for varchar, so the memory used for the user input is going to correspond to the number of characters. So if our input is 10 characters long, then we're going to be using 10 characters worth of memory, okay? Plus 1 byte, which is going to store the number of characters, all right? So that's for varchar. If we go for the char type, that's going to be slightly different. So the char type is going to store all the time, or use all the time, 30 characters worth of memory. So even if the input is only 10 characters, for example, we're going to be using 30 characters. So the other 20 characters are going to be filled by space, okay? Or empty space, or blank spaces. So the next one is going to be the password. Okay, I'm going to use a varchar for that. So for the email, we're going to use varchar, okay, just to optimize the use of memory, okay, because the length of email is going to vary quite much. And the final one is going to be the age, and it's going to be an integer, okay. And let's set a maximum number of characters for the password, 30 characters. Okay, now let's click on save. All right, now let's go to our database and click on the users table. So at the moment we don't see anything because our table is empty, okay? So the query we run to see the records inside our table is select star from the table users, okay? And then we've got limit 030, meaning that we're starting at record 0, and we're going to be displaying a maximum number of records equal to 30 records, okay? So now let's insert some records inside our table by clicking on insert. Okay, so let's give the first record an ID of 7, for example. Let's place an email there, name at gmail.com, a password, an age, okay. And for the second record, let's leave the ID field empty and let's have an email, password, and an age. Okay, so let's click on go. So that's the query we had to run to insert the records inside our table, and that's the result. So 2 rows inserted, so that was successful. Okay. All right, now if we click on our table again, now we can see that we've got 2 records inside our table. So you can see the structure. So those are the fields, ID, email, password, and age. And we can see the values inside our fields. Okay. So for the first record, these are the values we have inserted ourselves. But the second one, we can see that the ID, even if we left it empty, it's equal to the previous ID plus 1. And that's due to the auto increment property. Okay. Now we can do things like deleting a record. So you just need to click on the delete button, or editing the record. Okay, so let's delete the second one, for example. Okay, and now we're left with only 1 record. So far we understood how to create a database using the cPanel, okay, and also how to use PHPMyAdmin to insert or create a table inside the database, manipulate the table, add records, delete them, or edit them. Okay. So in the next few videos, we're going to learn how to do all these operations using PHP and MySQL. So you're going to be connecting to databases using PHP MySQL. We're going to be creating databases, tables. We're going to be inserting records in tables, deleting them, deleting tables, and so on.